Welcome to this second lecture in Ethics in Business and Management. My name is Juliette de Wit, and similar to Raymond, who has given you the first lecture in this course, I'm also one of the teachers that is, on the one hand, tutoring to tutorial groups, and on the other hand, I will also provide some of the lectures in this course. So this will be the first, and also next week you will see me, and in week 6, if I'm not mistaken. So I've already told you that I'm Juliette. Raymond has also introduced me in the first lecture, but I'm a teacher here at the Faculty of Economics, and the picture on the slide is when I defended my PhD thesis. This was in December last year. And you see I'm looking very happy because I was promoted to become a doctor. So it was a very happy occasion a month ago, 2 months ago already. Imagine that you have any questions after this lecture. Feel free to shoot me an email. My email address is here listed on the slide. But hopefully I can explain all of the material in today's lecture well enough such that there are no questions left. But of course, if there are questions, feel free to address them in your tutorial or via email. So as I already told you a couple of minutes ago, this will be the second lecture in our course. Professor Zaal has introduced the course to you last week, detailing why we should actually talk about ethics in business and why this course is also relevant for you. And today and also next week, I will go into detail into some of the main normative ethical theories that we will use throughout this course to determine whether an act or a development or a situation is morally right or wrong. So these will be very important theories because they are the tools that will be very helpful to us in our discussions in the tutorial, but also for writing your assignments. These will be sort of the building blocks in your argumentation and also in your conclusions to eventually conclude whether something is morally right or wrong. So today we're going to start with two theories, and next week we're going to work on another set of theories. These theories, if you're interested, you can find them also in the book in chapter 3. So I know that some of you did not receive the book yet, so I would say listen to the lecture, have a look at the slides, and of course there's also a lot of material that you can find online if you are interested. So for example, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is a very nice source if you want to read a bit about the theories that we've discussed so far, or that we will discuss today. Right, so that's week 2 and 3. So what we're going to do today is, as I already told you, we're going to look into normative ethical theories. And we're going to start off there by making a distinguishment between ethical relativism on the one hand and ethical absolutism on the other hand. And these are two different perspectives on ethics and on ethical theories. We'll discuss a bit about these two views, and then after that I'll go into two absolute normative ethical theories, and these are utilitarianism and ethics or duty. Before I'm going to do so, I'm going to start with a brief recap of the lecture of last week. And another thing which is good to know before we continue is that I'm going to split this lecture in 4 clips, which you can watch and listen to separately. So we're going to have different parts, but this is something that will be indicated every time we move on to a new part. Right, so last week's lecture dealt with different topics, and one of these topics, or sort of the broad theme, was, well, why should business care about ethics? And I think that's a very relevant question, right? Because you might also wonder, businesses, they just have to, or they have a very economic motivation, or they have an economic role to make profits in society. And if they make profits, they pay the wages to their employees, they are doing a good job. But of course, if we think about ethics, you might reach a different conclusion, right? So we might argue that companies also have different responsibilities than just the economic responsibilities to a society. So you see on the slide, I have a pyramid there, Carroll's CSR pyramid, which shows you how the responsibilities of a company can be built up. And there you see that, and this was also discussed in last week's lecture, there are four levels where the economic dimension is the base level. And this is indicating that, of course, the economic dimension, making a profit, having a sustainable business, is important. And if a company fulfills that, it can continue to the legal dimension, after that the ethical dimension, and then on top of it the philanthropic dimension. So there may be various reasons to incorporate CSR, corporate social responsibility, in a company. There may be economic reasons, right? The company may say, well, customers, they demand increasingly more green or sustainable products, so this will be profitable for us. But there can also be a moral dimension to it, that you think as a company that you should conduct business in a corporate socially responsible way. And of course, this second argument, right, thinking of the moral dimension, is something that will be interesting and discussed into more detail in this course. Last week, also the difference between views to the firm, a shareholder view and a stakeholder view, was introduced, where maybe you remember this. Milton Friedman was discussed as sort of the founder of this view of shareholder, of the shareholder view of the firm, right? The idea that a firm only needs to make a profit. And then later we have a new view of the firm, which is the stakeholder view. And this view goes against the shareholder view in saying that there are multiple stakeholders that a firm needs to take into account. So not just the shareholders, but also the employees, the customers, people living around a company, right? There can be many different stakeholders that are important for a firm or to a firm. And all of these stakeholders should have a stake in how the firm is viewed. Right, so that's the pyramid. Last week also globalization has been discussed. Right, globalization has been, well, a development over the past couple of decades that has changed how businesses are run. And together with globalization, we, for example, see that there is more or increasingly more diversity in employees, that supply chains have become larger, right? They might have only been located nationally, but now increasingly many different parts of the supply chain are located across continents. And of course, this complicates things, right? So how do we conduct business if there are different cultures that we need to conduct business with? And these cultures have different values within companies. People might think about things in different ways. How can we still conduct business if these differences prevail? And another question that arises due to globalization, if you are a multinational that conducts business in different countries, you might also run into the issue of legal frameworks, right? To which legal framework should you adhere if you are based in different countries? And you might also wonder, given that multinationals are often very large firms, how is the issue of accountability arranged, right? Are they also accountable for their acts, or is this something that they are maybe not accountable for? So these are questions that are very interesting, I would say, and are very important for a course like business ethics, right? We can use our intuitions, our moral intuitions, but also the ethical normative theories that we're going to discuss today to analyze questions like these. Well, and then on the right-hand side of the slide, you see a windmill which indicates the issue of sustainability, right? We have spoken about sustainability becoming increasingly more important, right? To be able to develop in a way that also future generations can still enjoy life, can have a good life. And also that affects how businesses should conduct their business, right? They should, next to taking economic factors into account, they might also recognize that social and environmental considerations are very important. And this is something that we also call the triple bottom line. Right, so let's go to the next topic. And I want to go into normative ethics, right? So there is a difference. So if we think about normative ethical theories, then we may have different perspectives here. So normative ethics is actually the science that asks how ethical decisions ought to be made, right? So what is, if you want to make a good ethical decision, what is the way to go? And normative ethics can help you to answer this question, right? So it can help you by studying rules and principles that determine what is morally right or wrong in a given situation. These rules and principles can help you to indeed decide how to act in an ethically right way. So these theories, these normative ethical theories, will be discussed today. And this is different from descriptive ethics. Descriptive ethics is the science of how ethical decisions are actually made, right? So what is or what are the moral beliefs and practices that can help you to describe how people actually behave when dealing with moral issues, right? So it's a very descriptive science. It does not prescribe anything in the way that normative ethics does. And descriptive ethics can be interesting to sort of understand how moral decision making works, right? So how do people think about a moral issue? When does their behavior change, etc.? So that's something that we're going to discuss later in this course. But for now, we're going to focus on the left-hand side, right? So the normative ethical principles and rules that these various philosophers have come up with. So let's continue to a thought experiment, and this thought experiment is called the trolley problem. And you might know or may not know that philosophers really like thought experiments because these thought experiments can help us to get our moral intuitions going. So this is a hypothetical case, not something that happened in real life, but it can illustrate very clearly what kind of different consequences your decisions may have. So let's discuss the problem, right? So imagine that you are envisioning or you're standing behind or besides a train track, and there is a trolley or a train passing by, and you see that this train is coming from far away. And on the other hand side, if you look to your left, if you see the picture on the slide, you see that there are workers working on the train tracks, right? So there are 5 workers in red that are working on the train tracks. And you see this train coming, this trolley, and you notice or you realize that this train is not going to stop. It's driving too fast to be able to brake in time to save these workers. So you realize this is really going to go very badly, or it's going to end very badly for these workers because they will all be killed. That's the realization that you have in a split second. Right? So you're standing there, and at some point you notice that there is a lever behind you or next to you. And this lever is something that you can actually pull. And if you were to do so, I'll show you, the train will be put on a different track, which is next to the train tracks that it was going to drive into. And on this train track, there is only one worker working, right? So you have a choice, and you actually have the option to save these 5 workers that the train is going to to run into, or you can decide to indeed direct or redirect the train on a different train track and then only kill 1 person, right? So there is, in a way, there is a very clear moral dilemma here where you can decide whether 5 workers die, you do not pull the lever, or you save 4 workers and only 1 person dies if you pull the lever. Right, so now the obvious question, should you pull the lever? And this is something that I'm going to give you some time for. What do you think? So of course, I'm not going to hear your answer here. I would love to. But I'm guessing that some of you would say, well, we need to save the 5 workers, right? We can sacrifice this 1 worker, but well, that's the best we can do, right? Saving 4 at the expense of 1 is much better than letting 5 people die. Someone else could say, well, is it, or could maybe question, is it justified to sort of sacrifice this 1 worker at the expense of 5 others? How much is a human life worth? I think that's also a very good question here, right? So this is an ethical dilemma. There are 2 choices that you can make. Each has their own consequence. And of course, it's up to you to decide or to evaluate what the best choice would be. So I'm going to make the dilemma a bit different. So on the next slide, you see there is still a trolley that's going to hit a group of workers, 5 workers also in this scenario. But now, rather than standing alongside the tracks, you're standing on top of a bridge that is above the train tracks. And you see or you hear the train coming towards you. And of course, you also see these 5 workers that are going to be killed if you don't do anything. And then suddenly, it's a hypothetical thought experiment, right? Suddenly in front of you, there is a very, very heavy, large-sized man, right? It's the man in red that's standing in front of you on the bridge. So the bridge is not very high, so you actually realize that you could push the man such that he falls over the bridge in front of the train and will save these 5 workers. I know it's not a very realistic scenario, but just bear with me for the sake of the thought experiment, right? So you realize you could push this man and save 5 workers. Of course, this large-sized man would be killed. He would be hit by the train and he will probably not survive this. What will you do, right? Should you push the man down the footbridge? Again, it's an ethical dilemma. What are you going to do? You can push him or you cannot push him. And interestingly, rationally, the choice is the same, right? You can save 5 workers by sacrificing 1. That's the same scenario or the same, let's say, consequence as in the first version of the trolley problem. However, intuitively, and I don't know if this is something that you also think at this moment, pushing someone is a very different experience than just pulling a lever. Right, so this is also because there's many philosophers that did survey research into this issue, is that you often see that people change their choice when moving from the first scenario to the second, right? So in the first, they would say, I would of course save the 5 workers and pull the lever. However, in the second, they would not choose to push the man off the bridge because they would feel bad about themselves, right? To push someone and then causing his death by doing that. So I think this is a very interesting hypothetical scenario because you very clearly see that in this ethical dilemma, there are different choices, and each of these choices has a different consequence. So from a normative ethical point of view, we're now going to ask, well, what kind of principles are emerging, right? So how are these different choices analyzed, or how can they be analyzed by ethical theories? Well, so these ethical theories, they help us to evaluate our actions and our choices, right? Should we pull the lever or should we not? And there are different perspectives on whether and when an action is good. So today we're going to discuss, later today, the utilitarian line of thinking. And a utilitarian would say, well, we should promote the overall good. We're going to discuss the ethics of duty perspective, which is a different perspective, as it would say, well, you need to respect human dignity and see goodness for goodness sake. Well, what that really is about, we're also going to discuss that today. And of course, there might also be another principle, right? You might have your own intuition about things, why something is right or wrong. Right? So going back to the trolley dilemma, you might say, well, saving 5 workers at the expense of 1, that promotes the overall good, right? It saves more people than otherwise would die, right? So you should pull the lever. And this is something that, from a utilitarian perspective, is actually considered good. From an ethics of duty perspective, and again, we're going to go into this later on today, it will be a bit more difficult. Right? So Kant would actually say, if you're going to respect a human dignity, you can never sacrifice a human life. So probably there you will choose not to pull the lever. And I'm going to explain exactly how this really works, considering these two theories in a bit. So normative ethics also has a lot of practical applications. I mean, a thought experiment is of course very abstract, not a real life scenario, but if you think about self-driving cars, for example, there might also be a choice, right? A car might hit an object in front of the car. What is the car going to do? Hit the object and maybe harm the drivers of the car? Or should it swerve to the other side of the road, potentially hitting a bystander? That's a very similar type of decision as the one we just discussed in the trolley problem. And also more recently, right, we have had the COVID, well, the pandemic, of course, already for 2 years. And there at some point there was the problem that there would perhaps not be enough beds to cater to all the patients, right? And the question was, well, who should the doctor prioritize? Also there might be a trade-off based on the characteristics of the patients that a normative ethical theory can help you to evaluate. So let's have a short break. And then after that, I'm going to go into normative ethical theories, relativism, and absolutism. So see you in a bit.